Hello everyone. This video is going to be about adding underlay to your top stitches. So we're going to start with the example of just a satin column. And we're going to add underlay to the satin column. So generally in satin columns, a lot of times you just have another column underneath it as the underlay. So we're going to just paste another column in the same location as the previous column. And then we're going to take the previous column and we're going to change the satin spacing to something much larger to act as the underlay. You can see now there's actual stitches that you can see below that are wider spacing. Now the start path and the end path are both the same for both objects because they were just copied and pasted. But what we want to do is we want to switch the underlay to go the other direction. Well, actually the tops, we want the underlay to go out here, let's say, and then we want the top stitches to go back. So what we want to do with the second graphic is we want to switch the stitch order or point order so that it goes the other way. And we can just click on the graphic and you can see now it's switched. So now it's going to go up and down. So let me draw the movie to see what it looks like. You can see you got your underlay and then you got your top stitches. Now, these are two separate objects, and maybe it's convenient to have this object be embedded in this other object. So what we can do is we can click on here, we can go ahead and we can copy the stitches from the object. We want to copy the stitches, and then we want to paste the stitches at the same location. So now you can see we have the stitches of the column as item 3. And item 3 can now be the underlay for item 2. So the way we add the underlay to item 2 is we simply go here to the curve modifications menu and we add underlay or start path, and we basically click the object we want to add the underlay or start path to, and then we click the actual underlay and start path. So now the underlay is part of this object. We can now get rid of this previous object because we already used it to create the stitches. Now what's important is the underlay has to be as drawn single stitch, and that's what we get by doing the copy stitches. One thing to note about the underlay is that since the underlay is a single stitches, uh, it can be modified just like anything else in the object. Like you can grab the points of the underlay and you can move them around. Not that you would want to do that, but you can. Also, the top graphic, you can stretch it out, but you notice the underlay doesn't go with it. It only goes with it with operations like scale, rotate, things like that. And the reason that is because the underlay, all the points will be scaled and rotated, but it doesn't really, there's no connection to the endpoint here of the underlying graphic to the underlay. And the same goes for the underlay. There's no connection to the underlay to the upper graphic. But since they're grouped together, any group operation like a scale, rotate, will move all the points together. So you might want to put your underlay last after you have your design all figured out. Or you could just leave it as another graphic if that's more convenient. If you left it as another graphic, basically I'm undoing here. If you left it as another graphic, you could simply paste another graphic And then when you have two graphics, if you group them together, I believe that they grow together, but I'm not sure about that. No, the same thing happens. It doesn't go together. So uh, do your underlay last, basically, for the satins. Now, and sometimes it's actually convenient to do other types of underlays. Now, I showed you the zigzag underlay, which is probably appropriate for the zigzag, but sometimes you don't really need to do a zigzag underneath. You can just do a straight line. So if you do already have a satin, you could copy the satin and then you could paste to the same location, and then you could just simply change the stitch type to, let's say, a single stitch. And now all that's going to remain is the center line that was there before. And you can go ahead and add it as an underlay to the other one. Now, of course, you want to reverse the stitch points again. So I don't want to do that one. I want to do this one. And basically, once you've done that, it will stitch out still the same way, but instead of using a zigzag in an underlay, I'll use a straight line. And sometimes that's desirable. Okay, the next underlay I want to talk about is, let's say you're going to do underlay for a fill. So we'll just draw a quick fill graphic here. Some kind of graphic. And it automatically goes single stitches, but we'll change it to fill by choosing the fill. Now it's full. um, so actually, I didn't want to do that yet. Let's undo the fill. What we want to do is we have a graphic that's going to be a fill, but then we want a graphic that's going to be the underlay. And we want the underlay probably to be another fill, or you could just draw your own lines underneath it and make your own fill. I used to do that, but now I have new features that allow you to uh, just use a fill as an underlay. So let's go ahead and do that. So basically we have what an object that we're going to make a fill, and let's say this is basically going to be the shape of the fill. And then we want to create a second object as an offset to that fill. So we choose the offset graphic from the curve modifications menu. And then we go here and we preview which direction it wants to go. We just, by doing the outside, we actually got it to go on the inside. The inside would be the outside. Outside would be the inside. I think I need to change the convention there at some point. These are a little confusing. But once you previewed what you want, we're offsetting it by 1/2 millimeter, which is 5/10 of a millimeter. And that's going to be good for fill underlay. So we're going to say OK to that. So now we'll change that one to a fill. And we're going to use a spacing that's much larger than the standard 2 that we normally use. So we'll just use something like, let's say 12, maybe a little smaller. Let's do 8. And now that can be our underlay. Now we probably don't want to have an underlay that's vertical. We want it biased to the fabric typically. So I've been generally doing all my fills at 135 and for underlay. And then for the fill itself, the top fill, we make that 45. So it's basically 90 degrees from the underlay. And this will stitch out really nicely because you got a nice foundation for the graphic. So we're going to move the underlay. Well, we don't have to move the underlay. What we can do now is we can take the underlay, and just like before, we can do copy stitches, and then we can paste stitches in the same location. And now this graphic here is going to be the underlay that we embed into this other one. So again, we're going to choose add underlay or start path. We're going to choose the object we want to add the underlay to, choose the object to put the underlay in. And now basically the underlay is inside the graphic. Now you can see there's a line out here which probably is not good. We don't really want that. Um, we want to basically be able to tell it how to get to the top stitches. So let's just undo what we just did. Think I'm doing. I guess I undid. Okay. What we want to do is we want to fill this again, and we want to see where it starts and stops. All right. So we see, we'll turn this one off. We'll see that the fill, once we do 45 degrees, is going to start here. And then the other fill, the underlay, stops here. Now we need to basically get a path to go to the other one. So what we do is we'll just draw a line graphic to go to the other one, like that. And then we basically are going to take these two objects and we're going to join them together. And the way we join them together is we just select the two objects and we copy the stitches. The copy stitches will be whatever is selected will be copied. And then basically we say paste at same location. And now we'll get a graphic down here that has those two combined. We can now put that as the underlay for the other graphic. There are several ways to do this. This is just one way I'm showing you. So we're going to do that as the underlay to that graphic. So now we can get rid of these. We're done with these. We now have the underlay under a fill. You can see how it stitches out. Now there's other ways to do this, like I was going to mention to you before. I'll go into that next. Now the other way you can do this is you can actually use the features of the fill that will help you with the underlay. You can actually use a fill as an underlay, and sometimes that's desirable because then the objects, when they're scaled, they'll redraw the fills together. So let me show you that. So I just got the underlay fill back and the top fill. Now both these fills are automatically being section ordered. So because they're being automatically section ordered, all the start paths to go into the different sections are already set. Now we can use that automatic feature to a greater extent by actually activating what's called the previous graphic start path for the top stitches. And what they'll do is they'll add a path from the underlay over to where it needs to go. So we just click that, we say update, and you can see that a path is now generated to the start of the top stitches. Now this path will only work if this point is within the top stitches graphic. If it's outside, it won't work. It won't be able to find it. So the underlay needs to be smaller than the top stitches for this feature to work. Now with this feature done, basically you want to keep both the underlay and the top stitches on the screen together, but you might want to group them so that when we select them together, we can move them around. And when we rotate, let's say, everything should go together. It's going to possibly generate new paths depending on the size of the object. Sometimes when the object gets too small, it might actually not work. But in general, you can play around with it and see that it does work for different sizes. So this is another maybe a preferred method for sections to do it this way.